Thank you. We move to Labour spokesperson Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stringer. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I'd like to start by thanking the Petitions Committee and the member for Linlithgow and East Falkirk for opening this debate. And I'd also like to pay tribute to the many tens of thousands who secured the debate through the petition process. What a great example of democracy in action. We've heard so many memorable and passionate contributions today, and I look forward to the Minister setting out what actions the government will be taking. I'd particularly like to thank other contributions to the debate, not least from my 11 honourable friends who have, on these benches, who have contributed to the debate today and made some truly compelling arguments. The fact that the overwhelming majority of contributions to the debate today have come from the Labour benches shows how hugely important this issue is to our party. The farmers' protests taking place in Delhi, of course, relate to 3 new agricultural laws which affect farmers. Taken together, they loosen the rules around the sale, pricing and storage of farm produce. They allow private buyers to stockpile essential commodities for future sale, and they set out rules for contract farming. The legislation is, of course, deeply controversial, and opposition figures and the protesting farmers have complained that there was insufficient consultation. The ongoing protests on the outskirts of Delhi illustrate the strength of feeling and the level of anger that so many members of the farming community feel. And Prime Minister Modi will by now be acutely aware of the backlash against his policies. But Mr. Stringer, India is a sovereign democratic nation, and its agriculture laws are a domestic matter. In a democracy, there will always be different views on the right course of action to take, and we acknowledge and fully respect that those views are held passionately by many British Indians and those who retain close ties to India. But as this is a domestic issue, it would not be appropriate for the UK Labour Party to comment on the specifics of the legislation itself, and so I will not be doing so today. However, since the first worrying evidence of escalating violence emerged, we on these benches have been urging the Indian authorities to protect and to defend the universal human rights of all those protesting in India. And I can assure honourable members gathered here today that we shall continue to do so without fear or favour. The Labour Party's foreign policy puts the rule of law, democracy and universal human rights and freedoms at the very heart of our global agenda. And we call for these principles to be upheld consistently in every country across the world. So let me stress in absolute terms that the Labour front bench stands firmly behind the rights of Indian farmers to exercise their right to freedom of assembly, freedom of expression and the right to peaceful protest. This is why on the 1st of February I issued a statement in which I drew attention to the escalating violence and the clashes between the farmers and police and the threat to essential democratic rights. I called on both sides to show restraint, but made clear that the onus is on the Indian authorities to protect the farmers' right to peaceful protest, to respect their right to freedom of assembly and expression, and to respond to any incidents of civil disobedience in a proportionate and appropriate manner. For instance, we are deeply concerned about reports of live ammunition being used by the police. And we, of course, call on demonstrators to keep their protests peaceful and within the constraints of the law. The Red Fort incident on the 26th of January is an example of where both sides must understand the limits of what is acceptable and that certain actions are likely to provoke outrage and escalation. In recent weeks, campaigners have been particularly concerned about the Indian authorities' disregard for freedom of expression and specifically for media freedoms. Human Rights Watch have stated that during these protests, the authorities have introduced politically motivated charges against activists and charged journalists and opposition politicians with sedition simply for reporting on claims made by the family of a dead protester. And following the Red Fort clashes between protesters and police, the Indian government shut off the internet as a way of curbing the protest, suspending 4G mobile internet services in 3 areas around Delhi, where tens of thousands of protesting farmers are camping. Services were restored, but it is clear that bans of this sort violate basic freedoms. The Labour Party therefore calls on the Indian authorities to recognise the vitally important role that independent journalism plays within a democracy and to protect its journalists from reprisals. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend. In terms of independence and the link between the government and certain celebrities, the farcical manner in which some Indian actors and cricketers copy-pasted the official government line simultaneously onto their social media accounts not only exposed to a global audience the 2019 Cobra Post cash for tweet string operation, but severely dented their credibility and conscience. Does my honourable friend agree that if our government had issued such an edict within our country, they would have been laughed out of the country, and subsequently celebrities with a conscience would have tweeted out the exact opposite in defiance?
Stephen Kinnock?
I agree with my honourable friend that the media and social media should never be manipulated for such political purposes in terms of speaking through others in a way that is not clear in terms of where the originator of the message is coming from. And it's very important that the media is used as a neutral source of information rather than one that is loaded with a particular agenda. Another universal human right is that of religious freedom. Prime Minister Modi will be aware of the deep concern that protests by farmers about economic issues, which is what this is about, have resulted in a significant backlash against Sikhs. He will have seen the instances of government supporters holding rallies outside Sikh places of worship and the fear that this will have engendered. Mr. Modi must recognise his responsibility in line with international law to keep... I will give way.
Stephen Malahatra?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and indeed he'll be aware of the car rallies that were targeting Southall, Leicester and Birmingham just 2 weeks ago that caused great concern, and I do pay tribute to the Home Office and the police at that time. But does he agree with me that this is why it's so important that interfaith communities like Southall Interfaith Forum and Hounslow Interfaith Forum that came together at that time and had said that they stand firm against right-wing groups who want to harm our community? It's vital that we across the world defend our democracies and freedoms and protect our communities from attempts at this division.
Stephen Kinnock?
I agree absolutely with my honourable friend, and let's be clear that this must be seen as an economic and a political issue and debate, and that must never be allowed to tip into prejudice around people's faith or their ethnicity. It's vital that we keep this focused on the issue that the protesters are in fact protesting about, and Mr. Modi does need to recognise that the world is watching, and what happens in India, of course, resonates here in our country. He must recognise his responsibility in line with international law to keep the Sikh community safe and confident in India's law enforcement. This recognition is important for the individuals and families affected, but also for those of us who are so keen to see India flourish as the great, successful, multicultural nation that we know it to be. The UK government naturally and rightly values its trade relationship with India, which stands at more than £18 billion annually. But the UK-India relationship must be broader and deeper than just trade. It should be based on working in partnership on issues of security and climate change, but it critically must be about the joint promotion of democracy, human rights and upholding international law. On the 1st of February, I asked the Foreign Secretary to raise the issue of human rights with the Indian government. And today I urge the UK government to engage more actively and more urgently with New Delhi. With this, I ask the Minister, what steps has he taken to engage proactively with his counterparts in New Delhi to ensure the right to peaceful protest is being upheld? Second, what representations has he made to his Indian counterpart about the need to resolve this situation peacefully by working with all parts of Indian society, including trade unions, and the need to advance the negotiations that have stalled? Thirdly, will he publish a broader strategy to defend internet and media freedom, not just in India, but also in other places such as Belarus, Hong Kong and Uganda? Fourthly, what steps has the UK government taken to support the right of Amnesty International which was recently forced to discontinue its operations in India. And finally, the invitation to join the G7 in Cornwall represents a significant development in India's role as a leading nation in global politics. Can the Minister confirm that the Prime Minister will be taking this opportunity to stress to Mr Modi the need for India to adhere to the high standards that are expected within the international community, in particular with regard to universal human rights and the rule of law? Thank you.
Thank you.